Who's that loud guy in the back?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final session before the IT Recognition Awards. So you are in AI Agents for IT Productivity. Hopefully that's the session you meant to be in. So I'm going to introduce Lucas here in a minute. There will be time at the end of the session for Q&A. And if you're online, feel free to please leave questions in the chat. So Lucas Gallagher has a background in cybersecurity and is a DevOps cloud engineer for UW-Madison's School of Medicine and Public Health, where automation is central to his day-to-day work. He leads efforts to responsibly adopt AI tools such as GitHub Copilot and plays a key role in deploying and configuring secure AI services to support medical research. All right, well, without further ado, Lucas.
Thanks so much.
Text. AI Agents for IT Productivity. Lucas Gallagher, DevOps Cloud Engineer, UW-Madison SMPHIIT.
So UW-Madison, of course, does a lot of research. Pardon me. And a lot of that, and in the area of medical research, a lot of that takes place in the School of Medicine and Public Health. So my day-to-day job is working in the informatics and IT wing of organization, and we operate a secure cloud in Azure that is appropriately secured and compliant with HIPAA requirements, so that if a researcher needs to spin up a virtual machine, needs to work with data, needs to even work with AI services with HIPAA data, they have a place they can go, they could build into grants, things of that nature. And that is the security and the compliance is already provided for them. And a lot of the provisioning and management and maintenance of that environment is done through automation. I love automation. I'm excited in particular about the powerful opportunities that AI gives us in the realm of automation. I do support researchers who want to use AI models. I get to play around with them and support others. So I have a decent amount of experience working with some of the AI tooling, such as GitHub Copilot, working with Microsoft Copilot, and then some of the services hosted models inside of Azure. So I plan to talk about AI tooling and how it can help us as IT workers to automate different parts and pieces of our day-to-day. In the second half, I'll have some demos. Time permitting, I'll get to 3 of them, showing 3 different use cases covering different levels of complexity and tool usage that is enabled by AI tooling. But first, what does productivity even mean? I'm not looking to get into the murky waters of quantifying worker productivity. I'm concerned with productivity, personal productivity as an IT worker, getting a chance to spend more time on the things that I feel have the most value or to which I can contribute the most value, and less time on the things that don't fall in one of those categories. So in light of limited budgets, limited personnel, limited time, when you consider productivity in relation, especially to AI tooling as an IT worker, I feel like automation is a key word. And it's kind of a way we should almost frame how we think about some of these toolings. So what can you automate? Flowing from that, what level of tooling is useful to perform some of those automations? I break down AI tools into 4 kind of broad categories. This is my definition. This is not necessarily a definition you'll be able to look up online and find it clearly laid out, and there's a lot of fuzzy edges between some of these different capabilities, particularly as tooling continues to mature. Information AI tools, that is the better search engine. That's the going to Google and getting an AI search result in there. That is talking to chat, back and forth with chat to process through a problem or to find information. Then there's composition. You could also call this ideation. That is write a song for me, create some audio file, create a picture, create a movie, create a document or a spreadsheet. This is also, I think, becoming more and more table stakes. Likely everyone in this room has played with some of these capabilities, and virtually every AI tooling at least has that level of capability in some way. Then there's app integrated AI tooling. As every software development company on the planet rushes to somehow embed some kind of AI functionality into their tool to show that that tool has value in the new world, this is AI that has awareness of its surroundings, of its context. It has tools that interact with components of the application it lives in. So this might be things like hooks where if you open up Excel and use Microsoft Copilot within Excel, it's aware of some of the features and functionality of Excel and can actually interact with them. So this is where that term agentic starts to come into play. My apologies to the first speaker. I know that that is a overused term, but really when we say agentic, what we mean is it's AI tools that can take actions on our behalf inside of a context that it's aware of and actually is able to execute actions and not just produce a document or have a text interaction. And then last but not least, there's agent orchestration. This is kind of another tier of agentic AI where you actually have, you're not just interacting with a single agent, but rather with a fleet of agents, maybe that are chaining actions along through a workflow. Maybe there's one orchestrator agent that's delegating subtasks to like sub-agents or worker agents. And this is becoming increasingly common as well, particularly in the areas like software development, which is often leading some of this space. But we're seeing it more and more in companies' platforms as well, especially as some of the economies of scale start to really play into the use of AI tools and how expensive it is to run like the biggest, best model at all times for all purposes, when we could actually be delegating some of the subtasks to cheaper, smaller models.
The coin appears beside text. What are the constraints?
I'm actually, for the sake of time, I'm not really going to delve deeply into constraints. We're in IT. We're all familiar with these. The one that I do want to call out is security and compliance. As you are looking at using AI toolings, adopting AI tooling, using it to generate code that's going to interact with more and more things, integrate with more and more other applications or platforms, touch more and more data, the blast radius of something going wrong becomes larger and larger. So it is really important as you're thinking about what you can do with these tools, what tools you would pick to do those things with, that you have and demonstrate an awareness of the cybersecurity implications and what responsible usage and guardrails looks like when you're using these tools, implementing these tools, or even consuming their outputs in some ways.
Considering options. What is available? A magnifying glass.
So this is another slide I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on because again, in IT, if we've participated in any sort of like software procurement process, we kind of get this. If we have evaluated pain points in our organization, we kind of get this. You can make a list of your pain points. You make a list of what would solve those pain points, what are the should-haves, what are the must-haves, and go from there. The one thing I'll call out for this on this slide is if you are starting with a problem and you don't yet have a solution and you're about to start looking for that solution, first find out what is already available to you. If there are things that are already, for example, approved by cybersecurity with the kind of data you're trying to work with, great opportunity there. You don't have to then go through cybersecurity to get something approved. If you have a supported tool on campus, great, let's use that. We'll have support already out of the gate. If licensing is already available, excellent. We don't have to figure out like how to run it through procurement and get payment. So take a look at what is already around you. And if you looked at a tool a year or more ago, and you kind of discounted it as like, it's not capable enough. This space is changing so fast. These tools are rapidly adding capabilities. It may even be worth looking at one of those tools that you've kind of discounted and seeing if it's now matured enough that it would be useful for your use case.
What is capable?
And then last but not least, worth mentioning too, even if you aren't using AI as the tool that is going to help you with automation, AI can help you craft automations. You don't have to necessarily even have something like GitHub Copilot or Codex or Claude Code to have AI tooling write scripts for you to make some parts and pieces of your work easier. All of the sort of out-of-the-box tools, even Google itself, just google.com, you can actually ask it, what would be a script that can do this? And it'll provide like a code snippet. You want to understand what the code snippet is actually doing and try to understand what it's going to touch on, again, harkening back to that cybersecurity component. But one of the things that AI tooling has given us is put within our reach is the ability for people who don't have prior experience with a code language to actually be able to automate with some of those languages. And AI too is really helpful when it comes to understanding what a block of code does and what even some of the risks are. But again, to make sure you have a real understanding of sort of the parts and pieces that's going to be touching on.
What is effective? Using AI tools.
So another thing that I wanted to frame before we get to the demos is when you're working with AI tooling, the process in many ways is kind of a black box. It's an agent with billions of parameters. It's really very difficult to comprehend what that process looks like, what's going to be produced necessarily, unless you have a really good grasp of what the inputs are, what information is needed, and really good grasp of what you want your outputs to be, whether that output is a script or a document or an image or a well-templated collection of documents that's going to be part of a project proposal. The better you understand your outputs and can clearly describe those to the tool, the better the output's going to be. AI tooling, large language models, they're built to be really, they're like the puppy that really wants to please you, but they don't always know how because they don't really understand what you're asking. Sometimes this seems like they're speaking a different language. So you want to, as part of your inputs, describe what you want your output to look like. If you're producing a regular email that's going to go out weekly, provide it with a template. Provide it with a description of what information that you expect to be in the template, what information it needs, and even prompt it to ask you if it's missing something that you have said is mandatory as part of that template.
Live demo number 1.
All right, so getting right into the demos here. And I'm going to juggle screens a little bit.
Composition with Chat with Expert. 365 Copilot, OpenAI ChatGPT Gemini Claude.
I'm going to start with a tool that we all have access to. This is not specialized software or something that requires additional licensing. Everyone in the IT organization should have access to Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Hi, what can I help you with? Message Copilot.
So the first productivity use case I want to address falls in that category of composition, that ideation, that creating something. This doesn't have to be Microsoft M365 Copilot. In fact, frankly, it is better in some of the other tools that are out there, whether it is like a ChatGPT, Gemini, in some ways. Some of the advantages of Copilot are whether it knows your environment well enough, and right now our Copilot license doesn't support that level of depth, but nonetheless, it has some real benefits. So I'm going to be showing you something that I like to call Chat as Expert. Let me go back to my Copilot window here.
His mouse hovers over the Message Copilot input.
All right. So before I start a conversation, we've got a scenario. Our scenario is my manager has just said our documentation's everywhere. We've got it in 3 or 4 different places. We don't have any standards. No one knows where to go to find XYZ. You're the one who has some bandwidth right now. I need you to come with a plan for bringing all that documentation to one place, giving us standard templates, and giving us a common language and common glossary around that. And that can be a pretty big ask. And the other thing they're saying is like, give me an action plan, give me an idea how much time this is going to take. Well, my expertise isn't in like knowledge-based curation. I don't have a lot of experience in, or even a strong opinion on where those documents should live. So what I have here is I'm going to instruct Microsoft Copilot to be an expert that I can bounce ideas off of. All right, I'm actually going to switch over to, so you'll see some of the sausage getting made here because I'm going to duplicate my screen. So there may be a little bit of bouncing back and forth. For just a moment.
Dozens of attendees sit at rows of desks in the conference room as Lucas prepares the demo.
There we go. So I'm dropping in a block of text that I've pulled from a gentleman named Rob O'Shaughnessy. He runs a YouTube channel called Rob Shocks. And he has this idea of you can actually curate, you can actually have AI chat agents or tooling act as,
Yeah, reshare the screen.
Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you for that reminder. One moment.
A woman approaches the lectern and assists Lucas.
Sorry for those online. There we go. So I'm framing what I want this chat agent, this chatbot rather, to be. I'm telling it, you're an IT knowledge management architect. Work with me, the project lead, to design documentation and knowledge-based strategy for an IT organization. Coming back to that whole like define your inputs and your outputs, I'm going to have it ask questions. I'm going to give it headings that I would like it to have in this document that it produces, so I can really constrain and sort of define what information I want to get out of this this process. I'm not going to go into too much detail here as far as what this is providing. One thing worth noting, I have this set to auto. You could actually pick a more robust model for this, and I would actually recommend that. We are likely going to run into an issue, but that's also part of the demo. So I told it to ask me some clarifying questions that would guide this output. And it's asking, do I already have a mandated tool? What's the size and makeup of the IT organization, the audience? And do you want it structured specifically for humans or for RAG? So hopping back over to my prompts here.
He opens 2-knowledge architect-prompt 2.md, then highlights code rows 2 through 4. He returns to Copilot.
So I would want to think about these sorts of questions. I would want to also, even with that initial prompt, have it constrain it in terms of how I want what I want it to be asking me about. Where are my gray areas? Where would I like to have better clarity? I would want it to ask me about that and kind of think through it. I've got some pre-baked answers, just going to throw it out there. And here's where GitHub Copilot actually often struggles. I told it I want a markdown document as output. You could just say text document or even Word document. It does sometimes. Yep, and it did it here. The markdown document failed to stay inside that markdown, that code container, and it kind of overran into other parts of the chat response.
He returns to the code.
So we could use a stronger model within the tool to compensate for that, or I can just tell it, this output's bad. This should all be a single markdown document, not mixed. Please recreate. So once it finishes, I'll have it do that.
He scrolls down through Copilot's response.
But this same process is something you could do with any number of documents that you're trying to create, or plans you're trying to make, or things you're trying to think through. You can, wherever there's a place where maybe your team doesn't have this form of expertise, or maybe it's even a place where you have expertise, but just a conversation around it would be really helpful. You can define what expertise you want the model to kind of limit its responses to, what domain it should be really thinking about. And that can provide a more powerful output or a good sort of grilling session. You go back and forth to talk about it. So it's now producing the document that I asked for. I would review the document. I might have some additional back and forth with Microsoft Copilot to refine it. And then once it's finished drafting that, I can then download the document in whatever format that is supported here, whether Word, I think it supports PDF, Markdown, et cetera, and provide that to my manager.
Final notes generate at the bottom of the response.
So that is something that that's a way to use this tool that's available to all of us to get sort of a sort of multiplier output. How long would it have taken me to create this document if I was just drafting it by hand? You can also use it as a research tool as part of that. If I was trying to explore what knowledge bases would support my use case, I could go through and have it sort of identify, here's the ones we have available for our use case. Do some of them have, would some of those meet our needs better than others? And kind of even narrow that research down. One other thing worth noting, you will see online, and in fact, I have a link at the end of this presentation. There's a number of things called skills or instructions. And those are ways of getting repeatable or having prompts or having repeatable actions that more complex tools can make. But you can actually usually copy them and paste them into Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT and get some of the exact same results. It won't have that app integrated element where it can actually interact with the application, like say VS Code or something like that. But you can still get a lot of that same power, a lot of that same repeatability, even with just a chatbot, and to produce like the same output on a recurring basis. Which brings us to automating with app integrated agents.
Text, live demo number 2.
So I'm going to actually open a repository here. So this is a real world example. The last one was kind of constructed for the sake of the demo. This is a scenario that my team actually had to go through.
He opens firewall policy migration instructions.
So what you're going to see is going to look like a lot of code. Please ignore that.
He selects rules legacy.
Don't worry about the specifics of the code that you see here. I'm just going to frame what we were confronted with. We work with this language called Terraform, and it has code that represents something that's deployed in Azure. In this case, it's just a firewall rule. It's just allow from here to there to XYZ using whatever form of port or protocol that's available. Azure, as Microsoft likes to do, had an update in how that firewall platform works. It changed what the Terraform looked like entirely in terms of it changed where in the API the code's interacting with. It changed a lot of things. And the way we deploy projects in my environment, we'll actually have 40 plus different projects, each with their own firewall rules within that project. And it will, then we need to now overhaul all 40 plus projects firewall rule sets, and they're fairly complex. There's conditionals in there. There are specific use cases, specific sources. The formatting changed, as did like the names of some of the source addresses, et cetera.
He clicks delete.
So this was kind of a daunting task. We were looking at, we were faced with probably 2 solid weeks of work for an engineer.
He opens rules.
So we decided to use GitHub Copilot, which is one of those app integrated AI tools, to automate this. I'm going to run the automation now and kind of describe how we got to the point of being able to run this automation as it goes. So I just typed /firewall policy migration, hit submit, and away it's going to go. So we had 40 of these projects. First project, I did the task manually. I went to that firewall rules.tf file. I made a copy of it, renamed it to firewall policy, and then I did the work manually. I changed all the different attributes that need to be changed. I converted to the new resources that need to be changed, et cetera. And as I went, I took notes on the gotchas that I was running into. I took a note where a syntax changed. Something went from an integer to a string, and now it had to add quotes around it, that sort of thing. I then took the migrated policy and the original policy and my notes, and I provided that to GitHub Copilot. So same sort of scenario you're faced with Microsoft Copilot, where you're just dropping things in the chat window, attaching documents. That's exactly what I did. And I said, I want an instructions file to take me from this original scenario, or this original legacy firewall rule set, and to produce that new firewall rule set. And I do have a ask me question in there, so I'm going to tell it. And I had one prompt in there where there's something that has to be unique across our whole organization, which is what was just on the screen there. So it created an instructions file, looked pretty good. I took that migrated file, the firewall policy file, and saved it elsewhere in my file system. Then I reverted the whole project back to its original state. So now we're back to the old policy. And I told GitHub Copilot, use the instructions file you just made, do this migration. And it produced yet another new file, a migrated file, and I could compare it against my manually migrated file and see where are there gaps, where are there issues.
GitHub Copilot evaluates the input text.
And I found that it got me about 80% of the way there. So I pointed out, again, using the tool, having a conversation with GitHub Copilot, I pointed out, here's where this is wrong, this needs to be, XYZ needs to be changed, update the instructions files accordingly. And I read through the instructions file and made some manual tweaks as well. Then I went to an entirely new project number 2 of 40, and I had GitHub Copilot do the migration. That got me about 95% of the way there. So I tuned it one more time, went to project number 3, ran the migration again. And at that point, I was confident I can run this across 40 projects, doing due diligence and auditing the output, of course, but I could let this go in an automated fashion. So it took probably 3 or 4 hours of my time to produce a result that would have taken 60 hours of time otherwise. And this is, of course, a code-specific example, but the same thing can apply to other forms of this form of automation. You have something that needs to be done once, but a lot of times, it's going to take a lot of time, or something that needs to be done repeatedly, like weekly. This could even be something along the lines of, I get these 4 reports, and I need to produce an email based on those 4 reports. I have a clear understanding of what the input is. I have a clear understanding of what the output is. It'd be great to have a repeatable process that I could run that would allow the AI to produce that for me. And again, of course, please do review the output. Don't just run the process, hit send, and you just sent an email that might have some incorrect information. But this can save a lot of time. And it doesn't necessarily require a GitHub Copilot to do that. A lot of different tools or platforms can do the same sort of thing. All right, so what we've got here,
He returns to skill.md.
Let's minimize that. So now we've got that new firewall policy rule set. I could look through it. I can say, yep, it looks good. We've already built in some validations on top of that.
The code in firewall_policy.tf highlights.
And I can then run it repeatedly across 40 different projects.
He clicks the close window button, returning to the slide.
So I'm going to close that one. And if I really do want to leave time for Q&A, so we are not going to get to the demo number 3. I will be have this slide deck actually up going forward to here. It's on GitLab in the SMPH public repository. This slide deck, as well as the sample files that were used to go through demos 1 and 2 and sort of walk through the ideas that were behind demo number 3 that I didn't get to today. So would like to open up then for questions.
Text, references. This deck and many of the code/prompt samples are at the hyperlink below.
Hi, thanks for your talk, number 1. And number 2, I know you work for SMPH, right? Yeah, as do I. And I know there's been a lot of questions about using things like GitHub Copilot because the university and SMPH don't really, do we have an agreement with them? Can we use anything other than totally public data?
So that's a really good question. Some tools the university has that are approved for a different classification of data, and they're available to everyone in the university. GitHub Copilot specifically is one where specific departments, schools have agreements with. So SMPH application development department has a specific agreement that does meet the requirements of that SMPH cybersecurity requires. And there was a whole process to go through that. I do know other departments on campus also use GitHub Copilot to an extent, but it is not one of the tools that is, unlike Microsoft Copilot, it's not one of the tools that everyone in the room may have access to. But many of the same things do apply in terms of the techniques you could use. If you have access to Claude Code or OpenAI Codex or Cowork or any number of those tools.
5 additional resource links appear below the slide deck link.
I was wondering, for your example, does this provide the tool with knowledge of how you wrote the code, so now it has an opportunity to exploit your vulnerabilities in the future, and does it point them out for you so maybe you can make things better?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It does come down to the agreement that the organization has with that tool. So if you just go to google.com and you ask it to produce a script, your query to google.com on Google is likely now in part of the training data that Google will use to create further models. Because we don't have an agreement with going to google.com unless you're signed in and using the Google Gemini, where we do have an agreement. So it really comes down to, do we have an agreement or licensing that governs what they're allowed to do with the data you're sending to the tool? So in the case of SMPH and GitHub Copilot, we have that agreement. In the case of Gemini, the university has an agreement, but it's still not cleared for certain levels of restricted data. So it's something you want to think about when you do send that information to that model, whether it's permitted, and then also whether that specific model that you're using, whether they are going to use that information to train their data set or not. Because yeah, as the keynote pointed out, if it's in their training data, someone could extract it.
Resources include Foundry Local and Llama.
Hello. I have a question about how to carry forward the development of the projects using agents. So we use agents to pretty much to create projects. And also, for example, we can bootstrap a project and it just throws maybe 1,000 lines of code. We ask a question and it just builds a solution for us. But we really don't know what is the architecture behind whatever it did, for a complex project. I'm really worried sometimes, and also have this question for myself, what if the project fails, in the long run, you're working for maybe 10 months or only on agents, and it badly fail, and you really don't know what to do about it because you really don't know the underlying architecture. So how can we approach this kind of situation if you're using agents in the development? Because our learning curve is near to zero if you are using agents in the project.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem because it'll produce, do XYZ, create this application, and suddenly you're 80,000 lines of code deep and you don't know what module A or module XYZ is doing. There's kind of 2 different ways to approach that. One would be to, during the planning phase, try and architect the app such that you have an understanding of what different components are going to do. and maybe, and then really important, I would say, is using tests around that same boundary to test that it is doing what you expect it to do. So you expect this package maybe in this part of your app that's going to interface with a file system. You as part of the build plan, you have a strong understanding of exactly what those inputs and what outputs look like. You have the code write that module. And so long as you know the inputs, know the outputs, and are testing both what you expect, like positive tests, as well as what modes should look like, negative tests, what the code is doing inside there isn't as important. Should you still have at least a bit of understanding of what's going on? Yes. But as long as you have a strong boundary, and I've heard this called like deep modules, shallow interfaces is kind of the way I've heard that term. And if you architect that at the beginning so that the AI doesn't kind of just take the ball and run with it and create black box code that no one knows what's going on, that can help a lot. The other thing is on the other end, if you have an app that's produced in that way, and now you're, for example, supporting it, treat it like it's an application that someone else has written that's been handed off to you. So you don't know what it's doing. You're now responsible for it. So you can use AI tooling to describe it, to create documentation for you, to draft logic flows through the app or visuals of what inputs and outputs are expected. Use it to understand the code, and then use that to write documentation and even explore failure modes too. Because one thing that's really helpful is use a more powerful model to do a cybersecurity review of the produced code to identify where are issues potentially that could be exploited especially if it's something that's publicly exposed.
One link leads to Microsoft Agent Framework.
All right, we are at time for this session. So thank you so much, Lucas, for your awesome presentation.